Well, excited to be with Brett Ullman. And if you're not familiar with Brett, Brett travels North America. He speaks to teens, young adults, leaders, parents on all kinds of topics, including a few of them are parenting, mental health, sexuality, pornography, men, dating, media. And he does seminars where he challenges attendees all around faith and culture. He's written a number of books, including Parenting, Navigating Everything, which I think is a great title. And man, we're really excited to have him looking at some of these tough issues and helping come alongside parents today. So welcome, Brett. Really great to have you.
Thanks. Glad for being here. Did I start off saying that even correctly? The very first thing I said, and
oh, don't worry about it. Glad to be here. You got it. You got it. So we're in the midst of a series at Connexus, all about family and the kids in our lives. And many people would say it's harder to be a kid than it was 10 years ago. Would you say that's true? And even if it is true or if it isn't true, what are some of the kind of cultural shifts you've seen?
Interesting question, because we could argue both. Like, kids are still kids, adults, like there's still, youth and all that stuff. But I do think the world has shifted. I'm 53. It is a different world. Now, can I also just say, with everything we say, I'm always worried there'll be a fear perspective, like, oh, the world shifted, and a fear conversation. Like, there's hope in all of this stuff. So even if things have shifted, it doesn't mean that we're victims in this and we can't have successful kids today.
Right.
One of the largest things that I've seen that's changed is probably the difference in change in parenting and technology. There was a shift in the mid-1990s where we left kind of the preparing kids for life and we headed into the protecting kids. It's very different, right? One is looking for these successful kids. Like, I have a daughter just graduated 4th year. She's in a gap year. Son's back at Queen's for his 4th year. But like, the goal is these individualized, successful, strong Christian kids heading into life and everything else. But when we protect them, we prepare them for a life that doesn't really exist. And then add to that the technology shifts. Whereas, when we grew up, if something bad happened, it wasn't kind of immortalized forever online. And now the videos, the things are there kind of forever. And then just I think it's Johann Hari who calls it altered childhood. Someone like, it's a language I hear a lot today, just the technology and how it's shifting, the being online, right? The comparison conversation, the ease of bullying, and even just how we, the lack of in-person relationships, the more time people spend on their own, which actually then bumps off physical health, right? The first thing that leaves when we're spending more time online is our exercise. And so there are shifts that have changed, and I think for the detriment, a lot of them.
Now, when you talk about just the influence of technology, I'll use the word screen time. Often for parents, I feel like, I'm a parent, I've got a couple of boys, it can so often it could just come down to screen time management. Like, how do we figure out the times they're on screens? How do we figure out when they're off screens? How do we get them off their phones? And talk to me a little bit about the broader dynamic that's kind of at play there. Because I feel as a parent, you get trapped in kind of a lose-lose situation where you're just policing time on screen. What's kind of the bigger picture, the wider dynamic, and how to walk with our kids through that? What are kind of your thoughts on that?
One thing we need to recognize is that we're not going back. I'm at a talk, I think it was last year, and I said, we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle, to which I was reprimanded at the end of the night. Someone said, Brett, we're Christians, we don't believe in genies. And I'm like, there was no theology of genies in what I just said. It's just,
right.
But we're not going back. Like, this is the world we're living in, and there's so many benefits of technology. But we have to really talk, like, screen time. That's one of, other than when should my kid get a phone, the bigger question people ask is how much time per day? Well, not all screen time is equal. So like, we have to really try to analyze, what are you talking about? Like, there's a difference between like creating a YouTube video and watching a YouTube video or Instagram or TikTok or whatever we're doing. And so are you reading a book? Are you literally just on your phone doing 8-second reels? Like, everything is different. And so to me, it's really important that we don't just say, well, 2 hours a day of what? Like, we have to really talk about these things and not set kind of like blanket statements on technology.
And sort of when it comes to talk to us a little bit about the different types of screen time. I think that's a really great point. And I think for a lot of parents, it comes down to phone, or if you're younger, it comes down to iPad. But can you talk a little bit more about even the nuance of screen times?
So back in the day, it's funny, the older I get, I say that so often. Like back in the day, you watch TV or movies. That was, so to say you get 2 hours a day was a very simple kind of line. And then maybe you get more on a weekend. And then video games came. And then there was a little bit of a change with that. But for most of us, even those like we're on technology right now, is this screen time? Like, of course it is. But so this is not all screen time is bad. And I think that the goal with tech, and I'm worried that there's a new narrative growing of all technology is bad. Right? There's this, like I'm an early adopter. This is my Aura ring. This does sleep tests on me. I know Carrie has one. I don't know if you have one of these.
He does. Yeah.
But like I love tech. I like all this stuff, but it's not all good. It's not all bad. It's kind of what we do with it. And so it's really, you think of like music. Back, I say our day. I know you're still in your 40s and I'm in my 50s. But
That's all right. I'm close enough.
But we've gone from like, the radio and like records, and then, we moved to cassette tapes or the CDs and all these things. But like Apple Music or Spotify, like that I can just ask my Alexa to play any song in human history is awesome. Like those are good things.
Right.
And same with screen time, like that you and I can do a podcast like this, and it can go on YouTube and out to your church through just a quick link on social media. Like what an amazing thing. When I am at a speaking engagement and I post like setting up at so-and-so church, and my prayer team prays from all over the planet, it's amazing. Like these are good things. And so when we have these blanket statements of bad technology, it's really, how do we take all this great stuff, but how do we minimize the negative things? And so to go back to your point about analyzing screen time, it's sitting down and talking about what screen time is and what are you doing online, and being honest with what we're doing online. I don't think you don't need a master's degree in counseling to know 7 hours of TikTok is bad per day.
Yes, that's right.
But when I was doing my master's in psychotherapy a few years ago, like I'm on the computer a lot and I'm writing papers and I'm doing research. Same when you're doing sermons or designing presentations, or even for a podcast, we do preparation. It's good, right? So it's finding this nuance and finding kind of there's like a tension we have to have with it all.
Right. And there's a whole dynamic there between parents and kids, where my son says, well, you're on your phone. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not doing something fun. I'm actually following up on an email right now. And then there's a whole question about, is that the appropriate time to be checking that email, and all kinds of nuance to the technology. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's interesting, the parenting stuff though. Like when my kids were young, so I like digital stuff. So I have a big, 12.9-inch iPads. Like that's kind of what I carry around with me. But if I'm using like the Logos app or reading scripture on my iPad, my kids don't know if I'm playing a game, if I'm scrolling. Right. And so I made some conscious decisions when my kids were younger if I'm reading the Bible, I'm physically reading a Bible, even though I like some of the digital content with it. But we also talk about that stuff as a family. So I'm a huge proponent of family meetings. We've had one every August since my kids I think they were 8 and 7 or around that time. But like talking about digital stuff's what we do. And so, if you're like, I need to be on the phone a bit at nighttime, that's okay. But it's also, is it okay? Like, are we modeling this well for our children? We can't say, get off your tech, and then we have our laptops out with the TV on from 5 until midnight as we're scrolling our phone and just inundated with technology. And so this is where often it comes back to us as adults. Are we creating screen-free time, dinner time? Do we talk as a family about how do we do this? And it's not us as parents and you as children. We're a family, right? I always kind of say it's us against the world. How do we get better at this? Because we know there are some issues with this. So how do we do it together? And then we together look at what that might look like.
I love that. Tell me a little bit. Family meeting, I'm so curious. Is there like a rolling, like what are kind of the rolling things, or I would say agenda items? Do I say agenda items? I don't know how you look at it. Or kind of the rolling things that you would say, hey, these have been the components of those family meetings over time. I think people will be really curious. I know I am.
So family meetings came from, I did years and years ago a program called the Arrow Leadership Program. It's you go for a week somewhere around the country. I went to BC. And at that point, the director was a guy named Carson Pugh. And Carson had said to have family meetings. And I remember thinking, this is the dumbest idea, like an annual general family meeting. Like, I apologize to Carson. It was a brilliant idea. And so we came home and, my wife and I were like, well, let's do it. So we put an agenda on the fridge. My kids were like 8 and 7, if I'm correct. We got to the day of the family meeting and there's nothing on the list. And I looked at my wife, Dawn, I'm like, did you tell the kids what an agenda is? And she's like, did you tell them? Like, they're little. They don't know what an agenda is.
Right.
But over the years, we began to, like, when the kids are little, do you need new shoes? What sport are you going to do? Like my son was baseball. My daughter was dance or gymnastics. Do you need new gear for what you're doing? Or, our church has a few different services. Which one do we want to go to? Are you going to go to junior youth or high school youth or camp? I love camp. And so, like, which weeks do you want to go? Or can they go to more than one? Like, but these were things we talked about. And it's a lot of, and this is kind of counseling language I use a lot, but it's head to heart. So there's a lot of head stuff, like the planning, but then the, how do we want to live our lives? What does being a Christian family look like? How do we deal with technology? Is there anything that we can do different for you as parents? And we had a lot of mottos in our house, like help us say yes. Meaning if you want to go to a sleepover or something else, like help us say yes. And so that it's not just this no right away, that we can try to give you whatever you want to do, but help us say yes. But each year we would talk about these things and kids got older and older and older. And I mean, I have 2 older kids now. I mean, they're both, my daughter's heading off hopefully to law school. My son wants to be a psychologist. And so they have lots of school ahead. And so now it's a little bit, other than our money, what do you need from us?
Right.
And we sit down and it's real open, like, when I call you on FaceTime and I just need that connection, like I'm a huge attachment parenting guy. Like, so our kids call just for kind of like an EV car. They need to be reconnected, right? Little quick recharge. And then we're there when they have a bad day, that they can just vent and go through what's going on. And so I would encourage anyone, I do have a YouTube video on this, but you can set your agenda with whatever you want. Even for us, like a family vacation when the kids were younger. It's not like we can go anywhere in the world, but it's like this week, if we're going to go away, where could we go? What's the cheapest place we could go? But
right.
It just meant we're a family, right? We all make decisions. My favorite was we voted one year, where in the world do you want to go for vacation? And the 3, like my wife and 2 kids, voted Mexico. And I voted anywhere in the world but Mexico. Now, reason being the cartels had just blown up a government building and I'm terrified. I'm like, as we landed in Mexico, my son looked over a few seats down and he's like, Mexico. Like he knew, like it was a funny thing, but I got voted out and we went on a family vacation. It was safe and everything was fine. But
sure,
I just love the idea of our kids had a say. And there was something, it's probably the most precious times we've ever had are our family meetings.
That's great. Now, I can see a meeting like that for some 2-parent families, that there would be an element of, oh, when I sit down with the kids like this, it's clear we have 2 different approaches with 2 different styles. And I know you do talk a little bit about parenting styles. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about different styles, different approaches, and how people can move forward when they see things a little bit differently.
So parenting styles, like it's funny, everything we talk about today is all connected. Like every parent listening, if you're on social media, search some of these things. Search parenting styles, Christian parenting, whatever our terminologies are. And these algorithms will start to serve us really, really great information. Parenting styles, I mean, there are, like Jeff, my first video I made was 50. It's on YouTube. I'm at 250 and growing. Like there's so many parenting styles. Now in a second, I want to explain there's only 4. But the ones we all know are more what we call intensive parenting. That's not the term we know. We know helicopter parenting. We hover over. My favorite is called Black Hawk parenting. This is the movie Black Hawk Down from 20 years ago, whatever. But this is where it's a military helicopter. This is where we swoop in, we blow everything up, and then we fly away. Bulldozer, lawnmower. They're all the same idea, though. We paved this perfect road for our kids. But in this, we prepare them for a world that doesn't exist. And so, I mean, books by Tim Elmore, Julie Lythcott-Haims, How to Be an Adult. Like, there's so many books that talk about this conversation of not preparing our kids for a world that doesn't exist. Like, it's okay to fall down. It's okay to not do well in something and grow your resilience to get better. But in this too, we're over functioning. And so one of the big things we see today is the growth of over functioning adults.
Mm.
But an over functioning adult creates an under functioning kid. And so this is where it's really important we realize that there are consequences to how we parent. Like fear-based parenting has been a lot of what I see. And especially in the church, we seem to, I don't know why, but often I see a great, and I'm very fortunate. I travel across predominantly in Canada, the church, denominations, everything, but there's often a bit of fear, the world and us, Christian, secular, like these kinds of things. And so it's important sometimes just to, a fear-based parent, this is why we're now seeing, like, let's say driver's licenses. We were at 96%, if I read the stats right, 20 years ago. We're at 42% of 18-year-olds have their licenses today.
Right.
Like, that's a staggering difference. And when I just say to young people, hey, why don't you have your license? Often I hear like, well, we drive a van, or we live in a big city. And like, I'm in Lindsay, I'm in Ajax, like where I live. And it's like, I can hear the parent. Like, when I was a teenager, if you said to me, Brett, can you drive a bus? I'd say, sure. Like, I was young and dumb, but like, we were fearless, and now we're fearful of a lot of things. And this moves in, our fear-based parenting moves into why kids maybe aren't dating a lot, why some kids don't want to go away to college or university. Like, you can see some of the consequences of how we parent. And so even over functioning out of love, it's trying to realize that there are reasons that it's okay for kids to learn different things in life. And I think the best way to think of it is whatever your parenting style is, and this is where you said if they're different, your goal should be raising kids that are going to head off. Like, I use the word individualized. Like, it's just that my son is his own person. My daughter is her own person. And they're leaving, with a strong Christian background. I come from, that's my heart. But they also are heading into life and work and family and all these things together. But to go back, you said, what if they're different? That's an interesting.
Yeah, what if the parenting styles are different? The approach is different.
So if you'd ever take a psychology class, there's only 4 parenting styles. You've heard these, like permissive, like basically it's we love, and like we love a lot, and then we ask a lot or have influence. And the goal is like, well, the one we all know is we don't love a lot, but we ask a lot. Authoritarian parent. I'm the parent. Do what I tell you. The one, though, that we need is we push our kids a lot, but we love them a lot. Like, one of the lines we've used, my wife and I, a lot is, we're for you, we're not against you. Like, like knowing if anyone has your back in this life of yours, it's us. Like, we're behind you, this idea of unconditional love and everything else. But first off, it's okay to push your kids and love your kids. And it's trying to find where you and your partner, spouse, whoever is on that graph. But I think it's important to realize what research says. And like, just because we're Christians doesn't mean peer-reviewed research is bad. And like, peer-reviewed research says the only parenting style that we should be doing is authoritative parenting, loving a lot and asking a lot. And so when you lay it out, like parents can say they're all different. And whether it's in a counseling environment or at a talk, and I'm like, well, your goal is the same for your 18-year-old, right? You want them to be prepared. Yes. All right. So let's get into a bit of the history. What brings you to the place you feel? Is it fear, which often it's their own upbringings, their own understandings, their church backgrounds? Have they read any books? One of my favorites is Hold On to Your Kids. Gabor Mate, he was a doctor in Vancouver, and Gordon Neufeld. I think he's from Alberta. But just read a little bit about parenting and all of these things. And I think often you realize you actually have very similar thoughts. Sometimes it's just different in how one person feels one is more important than the other. But you can work through those things. Right.
That's the kind of the two, it's two dynamics at play, like between both things at the same time. Yeah. Okay.
There's a great quote. Sorry to interrupt. There's a great quote.
Yeah.
Tim Elmore has this quote. Some parents fail to realize that it's a job of every child to tear down their parents' fences and build their own.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's really helpful.
I call those stop quotes. It's like if I'm reading a book and I read that, like I lean back and I'm like, okay, I'm done for a minute. Like there's so much to that. Like, I want my kids to love Jesus, not because I love Jesus, but because they love Jesus. Well, that's a different, like I want them to realize it's important to get a good night's sleep or to That's an interesting one because my wife and I abolished curfews in grade 11 and grade 10 for my son in our house because we knew they'd both be away to school. And so how do they know how to function without curfews, without us, if they can't do that while they're at home? And so it's kind of like when they're little, it looks like I'm strangling a kid. I mean more like when they're riding a bike, your hands are on and then your hands are a bit away. Like little kids heading into middle school, and there needs to be a little bit of a releasing as we head to the high school years.
Yeah, talk to me, Brett, a little bit. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the let's call it the arc of conversation from infancy, up until adulthood, and kind of from a 30,000-foot level. Kids are making mistakes at all of those ages. How does the conversation change, or does it change over the course of that arc? I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, no matter the topic, first it's age appropriate, but also realizing that kids go through these stages differently. It was Sandra Stanley who talked about the different, like we talk about Andy, but like she wrote a blog once on the different stages of parenting, and kids go through those differently. Like if you have a kid in rep sports, like my son was a rep baseball player up until grade 11 or grade 10 when he wanted to do the LIT program at Minneowi. My thought here is the idea that if your kid's in a rep sport, they may go through these things quicker than others, meaning if you have two different parents in a small group, one might be talking about things a bit sooner than another parent. I do think, though, that the one thing from a 30,000 square foot view, there's a book by Dan Heath called Upstream. We need to become people thinking about a prevention conversation as opposed to when things happen, we're reactive. And so no matter if the conversation, like parenting, build the best relationship you can with your kids. Like this is where we start when your kids are young, attachment parenting. The greater you are attached to your kids, first off, the less likely they'll fall away from Jesus, which is an interesting thing. Another one I read recently, because I have a new talk on marriage, is the greater your marriage is, right? If you're fighting and angry a lot and all these things at each other, there's a more likely your kids will fall away from Christian faith. But whether it's conversations on sex and sexuality and these big conversations of the day, we have to have them as we walk through all ages and stages. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe part of this is just having an open conversation with your kids, like the dinner table.
Right.
Meaning anything goes. Like if you haven't, as a parent, choked on a piece of chicken as your kid asks a question, I think it's a good thing, right? Like I think it's an important thing that your kids feel safe enough to ask you. Because if they don't ask you, maybe they're going to Google. Which would we rather? We'd much rather them come to us.
Okay, this is great, because I want to ask you about a couple specific things in particular. When you get kind of that chicken caught, you go, oh man, this is happening now at the kitchen table. I want to just ask you about a couple of those. I know you've written a lot of material on these, so people can always go to your website and find a lot more. But let's just talk about pornography. You're a parent. You find out one of your kids has either been exposed to pornography, even struggling with pornography. What would be kind of your key insights for a parent on how to approach that conversation kind of the moment they find out?
We want our kids running to us, not from us. Mm-hmm. Like it's an easy, catchy line, but it's a really important one, meaning when your kids, so my son, we're hosting small group once, and my son's son, I forget how, he's a little guy, and he tugs on my shirt, and I remember saying like, what? And he actually said, boobs. And I'm like now, whatever conversation I'm having is finished. I'm like, what?
Right.
And he says, on the computer. And we went over, and he had turned the monitor off. We'd already talked about this, right? This is a prevention conversation. And someone had linked, and I mean, I had all the filters running and everything. Someone had linked Topless Woman to, it was a children's site. And so the first thing is like, if the first thing we do is discipline the kid and get angry at the kid, that's going to go underground. That kid will no longer come to you. Like the most important thing is we want our kids coming to us, right? It's coming to us and saying, whether I'm struggling or if we even find this, not responding in anger. Also, often I find parents use self-deprecating stuff. Like, what did What did I do to deserve this or something? It's like we're missing the kid who's the one in the conversation here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think too, we're opening up a bigger conversation here on sex education. That might not be the right term, but
Sure.
I would put forth that we need a new paradigm as the church. And so if you look at what we do as the church, when kids are little, and so I got a grant a few years ago to poll Canadian Christians on their porn consumption. Let that one roll around your head just for like, it's an interesting grant I got. We polled about 10,000 Christians, and 90% said that they were never talked to about sex their entire life growing up. Wow. Now, all statistics are wrong. They're all wrong. And Jordan Peterson, whether you like him or not, says that they're revealing, right? It's an interesting statement. And so kids don't get talked about these things much. And so whether it's pornography, have you as a parent addressed this conversation, talked about it? When my kids were like, when they're really, really little, there's books like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. These are age and stage just appropriate. They're for young, like we're talking kindergarten kids and stuff, but it's beginning a conversation. When my kids began taking the bus to school, we had talked about, what if someone passes a phone around and shows you a picture, and within weeks someone did that, and we talked about it, how to make you feel, what was it like? And we addressed these things so our kids always knew we had a place. Junior high pastors do this a little bit. Most youth pastors give 1 or 2 sessions a year on sex, and most kids don't come every week. So like if you might get 1 30-minute teaching moment a year, then you go away to college, university, which is when you'd mess up mostly from our kind of paradigm. You're on your own, you're away from parents. That generation is the kind of transient group as they're away. And then you get married, which we'd say from our paradigm, now you're free to be sexually active. And we never talk about it again the rest of your life. Mm. Like, if we're looking at this high level, that is just like, if we were like, all right, Jeff, you and I, let's design something that will fail. That's what I would put forth. Like people are destroyed by lack of knowledge. Like we need to have uncomfortable conversations for us. And so maybe the first thing as parents is recognizing, how are we doing in this conversation? Because I am inundated as a therapist and after my talks with people struggling, and it's not just an issue for men. The number of times people will say from the front at a church I'm at, well, this is an issue for men. It's like, no, I have more women that talk to me about pornography struggles than I ever do men. Now, I do think that's a shame conversation for men, and women are more likely to come forward, but how is it brought up in our home? Like, it's a lot of shame in these conversations. And so make sure we as parents don't abdicate our role to children's pastors, friends, whatever, like take a leadership role in our homes for these things. So make sure I think filters are wonderful when kids are young. Like let's block as much as we can on apps and different things. But if a kid gets caught, grace and mercy, right? Like, we can walk through this. It's not the end of the world. And then looking at maybe getting that kid a little bit of counseling. But like if we haven't dealt with those things, it's interesting how we expect our kids to.
Right.
But letting them know we love you. Like this goes back to parenting. When I had a grade 9, I actually said to my daughter once, I said, hey, can I say something weird to you? And I think she said, everything you say is weird. I'm like, give me a sec. And I said, if you ever get pregnant in high school, and she's like, Dad, I'm like, just give me a second here. I said, if you ever do, just know you can always come to me. My disappointment ever in life will never mean I love you less. And if anything, and this is not permission, we've already addressed these things, but if you ever, I'm here and your mom's here. And we talk the same about drugs and alcohol. If you ever go to a party and you get drunk or high, or if your friends do and you're driving home, we're here for you. Any place, anytime. We will pick you up, no questions asked. And so it's this idea of bringing up these conversations and talking about them with our kids that my kids have always, and we've never had any of these big issues. We've been very fortunate, but it's this root kind of thing of our kids know that they're able to fail in our house. And that it's not their fault. Like, if not that it's not their fault, but we will work with them. We'll figure out what happened. How do we make it better? Do you need some help? Do you need some support? Whatever it might be.
Yeah, my wife, Leslie, is much better at this than I am. And because sometimes I'll have I'm a passionate person. I can have an initial kind of emotional response. And she'll say to me, how do we have the conversation in a way that frames that we're in their corner? Where I approach it as, how do I solve this quote unquote problem, right? I immediately see it as a problem to be solved, which of course then makes my sons feel like they're a problem to be solved. Where in turn, my wife will say, no, how do we have this conversation in a way that they know that we're with them? And she's a good kind of, she'll kind of correct me real quick before, because we always try to go together on these things as much as we can. And that's been really, really helpful to me kind of as just a principle, because you feel that inside, you feel it rising up that like, okay, I'm a problem solver. So all I got to do is solve this, which is kind of devoid of emotion or, that I'm actually with you, if that makes any sense. But
yeah, there's a line, connection before correction.
Right.
It's been in so many parenting books that I've read, but it's a really good one. Connection. Yeah. They get caught like, this must be hard for you. This must be really embarrassing. You're talking to your family about pornography, and there's incredible shame. Like my clients who come in with this, there's shame and guilt, and there's this is like, I love Jesus so much and I'm struggling with this and I don't know, like, and they weep, and it's like, okay, let's look at how we can move forward with this, right? Like, it's not the end. And so same with our kids.
Yeah,
we can get through this. Now, my worry often is that sometimes I think I know there's a new documentary on it, but the REM song from years ago, Shiny Happy People, sometimes I think we as Christians, it's like, we have Jesus, everything's perfect. And it's like, we have Jesus and I live in a fallen world. And I've been unwell, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think like I've had a health journey for 12 years, and it's like, it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
And it's okay in your family if your kid is struggling with something. But we need to feel the freedom to talk about these things and walk through them and not just kind of brush them under the rug. It was Martin Luther King Jr., and I take his quote out of context, but he says, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. And it's like, sometimes we just don't talk about these things. And it's like, wade into these tough conversations as parents. You can do it. But that even might open up another thing of, do you even have the relationship to do it?
Right. And I love that you describe the discomfort of it, because I think that's just so, sometimes people say, what you need to do is normalize these conversations. And I think that's a pretty high bar. Like, it never feels normal. It always feels awkward. So even the fact that you use the word uncomfortable, I think as parents gives permission that, oh yeah, this feels uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to do it.
You might need help. Like, when your kid says, I'm struggling with pornography, you as a parent might not know what to do. Don't ignore it. You just, like, here's the simple kind of line. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I love you so much. I just need to get some help. I don't know what to do right now. And so you come talk to a pastor, a counselor, a leader, an author, someone who is in this sphere of stuff, and figure out what to do, and then come back and address these things.
Well, talk to me a little bit. This is a bit of a different topic, but around mental health and anxiety. I know you've had your own journey in that area. People who attend our church know I have as well, which is in a sense a totally different thing. But what it has in common is its hiddenness sometimes, where it's you don't know it's happening until it's more acute, and a son or a daughter can't hide anymore that they're struggling in this area. And what are the best steps when it comes to that sort of thing? When a child says, man, I'm just letting you know, I like, I'm having a panic attack, or I had a panic attack, or I don't know what's going on, but I don't feel right. I don't want to go to school anymore. My wife, who's a guidance counselor, often works with kids who are struggling to come to school. And sometimes on a parent, that it moves to that space quite quickly, and they kind of almost get surprised by it in some respects. When you sort of see the signs of anxiety, depression, or other mental health challenges in your child, with your child, or they're expressing it to you, what are some great kind of first steps in conversation?
I like that word, conversation, because the first thing I would say is, tell me more. Like, wade into this conversation. Like, turn off your phone, close your laptop, turn off the TV. Tell me what's going on. Like, we need to be become inquisitive as parents. As spouses is the same thing, another conversation, but like ask some good questions. What's going on? Like, I do think today we talk about anxiety too much. Back in my day, we never talked about it. Like, if I ask you 1,000 times, are you anxious? Are you anxious? Are you anxious? Are you anxious? Maybe one day you're going to go, I'm anxious. But
Right.
there's the like coming on a podcast for some people, their hands would be shaking the entire time. As a speaker, we've done this kind of stuff a lot more, but getting in front of an audience, if someone had to come forward at church on Sunday, read a scripture, do something, some people are shaking. Like, that's actually okay. That's not doesn't mean you have a clinical anxiety disorder.
Mm-hmm.
First date, first heading off to college, university, the workplace, police college, whatever it might be, very normal. But when you're just sitting and for no reason, your chest is fluttering and you can't catch your breath. Like, what's going on with that? Like, and try to understand that. The same as with depression. It's okay to feel blah. Like, we're still, as we head into the fall right now, like soon, about a month and a bit from now, the time will change and suddenly we live in the dark for a long time again. Mm-hmm. And seasonal affective disorder affects us, but it doesn't mean we have clinical depression. But when you feel like this weight ongoing on you and it's affecting, you don't feel joy anymore. And then there's some questions of, well, what do we do about this? And so creating an environment for our kids that they feel like they can come, like you mentioned, I had a panic attack. First off, I'm just so happy that kid came and told you. And then we ask more questions and we talk about it. We get some support. I know in my house, counseling has always just been normal. Not like, if you want to go, you can go. Most of my kids have gone in university. I love it. Like, I love the idea we as adults, and I think this is Tim Elmore says this, you need 5 adults speaking truth into your life other than us. And so coaches, pastors, teachers, aunts, uncles, small group, like whoever, I want this plethora of adults speaking into my kids, just like I want to speak into other people's kids when I see them as well. Mm-hmm. But once that's come forward, I do think we have to be careful that we assess, or we saw video on ADHD. You might have that, like, get assessed by people. Like, my big concern I see today is a lot of young people diagnosing themselves through YouTube or TikTok video.
Right.
Like, oh, I saw a video and it said, if you're happy sometimes and sad others, you know, you have bipolar. And I'm like, no, you're probably a human. Like, that's just a normal
right
thing. But get proper assessment. And so sometimes, and this, I love the term body, mind, and soul. Like, we don't know what's going on. I'm a kinesiology major by my trade, like years and years and years ago. And so, like, and I think this is paramount. Exercise, sleep, nutrition. This is actually my new book I'm writing called Control the Controllables. These are things that are literally, first, let's try this before we go to other things. Mm-hmm. Exercise, sleep, nutrition, social supports. Like, look at the body, go get blood work taken, go to a sleep clinic. I had a story which was interesting. Youth pastor friend of mine in Alberta, he had a breakdown like I kind of did. And I was at home I didn't leave my house for 5 months basically. And he had a similar story, but his church, his lead pastor said to him, it's a spiritual issue. You will not go to your doctor. You will not go on meds. We will pray for you. You'll be better. And 5 months later, he calls me and he's about to take his own life. And I'm like, what's your biggest issue? He said, sleep. I'm like, go to a sleep clinic. Like, there's nothing spiritual about a sleep clinic. Weird. I mean, you get electrodes all over you and you fall asleep beside it. It's like a strip mall. There's a Subway restaurant beside you. But
right.
I said to him in the morning, look at the doctor and say, can you fix me? And the doctor said, yeah, you have the worst sleep apnea I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
Darth Vader machine, CPAP machine. And this guy's better. Like, but it's like, it's almost spiritual abuse to me when we had like an assessment that's not actually an assessment. Like, let's see what's going on. So for some people, you're just burning out. Like, you're working 80 hours a week. You have family. We're the sandwich generation. We're taking care of parents maybe and children. We don't know what self-care means. And we might need to make some changes. And then the mind, for some of us, I mean, we just need to learn how to control our thoughts better. Or we're having some thought patterns where we're catastrophizing. We need some support. We can do that. And I often say, and there's always a bit of pushback with this, but it might be physical, it might be emotional. I don't say it might be spiritual, in that it's very rare that that's the answer, but it's my foundation from which I base everything in my life. And so whether I ever get better or not God is still God and I'm still not, right? That's my foundation. Right. So like build your spiritual disciplines and all of these things. And those things are helpful, right? Like there's the prayer and there's the calmness that comes with it. I heard your series you did last year, I think it was, or a few years ago on like, there's the disciplines we do have a great ramification on our mind and our body. They're all connected. But it's kind of like, I like body, mind, and soul because we can all do those things and begin to see if there's you ever heard the term Occam's razor? It's one of my favorite things. The simplest answer is usually the answer.
Right.
So I'm finishing, sorry for all these stories.
That's good.
I had a 15, 16-year-old girl come up to me after one of my talks and she's like, so my church says I'm demonized. And I'm like, okay, that's a big conversation. And then she said, and my doctor and mom are putting me on mental health meds tomorrow. This was a Sunday night. And I said, wow, it's really big. She's cradling a Venti Starbucks coffee. It's 8 p.m. And I'm just like, sorry, that's a decaf, right? And she said, oh no, caffeinated. I said, how many caffeinated coffees do you have a day? You know, when people process, they look up and to the left. She's thinking, like, I drink 2 a day. I don't need to process. I'm like, how many coffees do you have a day? She says, I think 6 or 7. Like, let's start with that. Like, that's, again, the simplest answer might be the answer, right? So rather than overcomplicating, and this is also a prevention thing for everyone listening, exercise more. It's good. As parents, take your kids, like we go for walks when they're little. When my kids were in middle school, we joined a health club together. You know, we exercise, we hike, we do things as a family. Talk about it's okay to not be okay. Talk about the mind, talk about mental health and these things. How are your friends doing? And then faith, model good Christian living and what that means. Like our kids watch everything that we do. And so be very careful. Like just make sure we're doing good modeling for our kids in that.
Well, for me, I mean, part of what you're saying is there are so many tools when it comes to the things that we struggle with when it comes to mental health. And it's that old adage, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like it can become, this is what my sister's kids are going through it. So it must be the same thing. And it must, they're doing this. So that must be what my kids need to do. But when you seek expert help, you find out, wow, there's a whole lot. There's so many more tools out there than you ever realized, which I think is hopeful. Anyway, I think it's hopeful. So
I often say from that analogy, I say that the toolbox is our faith, and in that everything goes inside of it.
Yeah.
And I want us to grow our toolbox and the tools that go in it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now, I know that there are kind of two different types of parents, I guess, or grandparents who could be listening to this who are experiencing these two different things. One is shame, which is like, oh, my kids are grown up and you guys have talked about a bunch of things and I didn't do those things. And now I feel bad having listened to this. Or two, another parent may be discouraged because they feel overwhelmed by the challenge of parenting. I would love for you, kind of as a last conversation piece, to speak to those parents.
The first one, it's my biggest struggle as someone who speaks on, like my new one's on marriage, but media, mental health, parenting. How do I challenge you to be better in this without shaming and condemning you from where you're at? Mm-hmm. Is this not like every pastor and teacher, like every time we get up? And so I love the quote, the social activist poet, Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And so for those people who are listening and going, I did it wrong, or other things, like many of us didn't have the teachings and trainings on these things. Like even you guys as a church addressing mental health and addressing parenting, I often do Sunday mornings on mental health. And many times people are like, I'm 75. I've never heard a talk on mental health my whole life. So release ourselves from the shame and everything. And maybe it's apologizing to your kid about what you could have done differently, but then looking at how you can equip them to help the next generation. And so that's kind of one. But for the parent who's overwhelmed, the first thing is to realize it is overwhelming. And everything, like we've chatted about so much stuff in a short podcast today, but like you don't need to start with everything. Start with one thing. Like I often say after my talk, it was John Maxwell years ago who said, when you're challenged by someone, choose one thing, just one. It's like when I was growing up, we'd have those eggs from the dollar store, those sticky things in, and you'd hurl it all against a wall and a bunch would fall down, but some would stick. Like, what's something that as we were chatting today, you leaned back in your chair and went, that, like family meetings, like family dinners, whatever else we were chatting about. But there's being overwhelmed, but there's also, if you can also read books. I mean, the recent stat I read says that 57% of Canadians read 0 books last year.
Oh, wow.
This worries me. I mean, first off, yes, we'd be reading the Bible, and there's many of us who don't open that week to week, but always have if you're a parent, have a parenting book on the go. Like, and there's so many of them. If you go to my website, and we'll go through this later, but brodeullman.com, at the very top is my Amazon A. And if you click on parenting, it's every book I'd suggest you read, but start with one. And you can go to your public libraries and get these for free or on like Audible, but it's at a public library. I think the app's called Libby or something, but learning, like growing in this, take every parenting course you can, go on YouTube and type in parenting and learn some of these things. But for some of you, you're overwhelmed because you don't have any more bandwidth. And so you might need to change how you're living life. One of my favorite analogies is the jars analogy, like the rocks of life. You've heard this before, the big rocks, the smaller rocks, the sand. And so this to me is not just a mental health conversation or a technology, but it works for everything. Like, what are the big rocks in your family? Like, my family would be faith, family, friends, exercise, nutrition. Like, there's all these things we put in, but those go first into our jar of life. Then goes in the smaller rocks. We could always debate what this is, grocery shopping today or tomorrow, vacuuming today or tomorrow. But the sand is all social media, all streaming services, all sports, even though I love sports, all video games. But once everything's done, the sand then fills what's left. But what you have is you've done the things that need to have been done. And so if you're very overwhelmed, it might mean that you need to pull back a bit and look at what are the things that are important. And maybe, a lot of parents will say to me, I've never read a book on parenting, but they watch 2 to 3 hours of TV each night. And it's like, okay, let's pull back TV a little bit and add in some learning for these conversations. And if you're overwhelmed, be brave and address these things and begin to learn about them. Talk like it's like we need to lean into these conversations that we have, right? It's rather than leaning away and not addressing them, lean into them and see where it kind of goes.
Yeah, but that first step, I guess you take that first step and then one more step versus, all the steps and just engage it. This has been really rich, Brett. I really appreciate your time. Brodeullman.com is the website. Here's my suggestion to you as you listen to this. Decide on the one thing you want to learn about and then go to Brett's website because he's got so much stuff there. It's fantastic. Think about, man, what's the one thing I want to key in on and then go there to find it. Brett, where would people start if you said, hey, here's a resource to start? Yeah, talk about that book.
This was released during just the end of COVID and realizing people aren't reading. I don't know.
Sorry, Brett, just say the title just in case people are listening so they can hear what it is.
It's called Parenting Navigating Everything. But it's basically 6 or 7 books in one. And so the first 7 chapters, the 7th is on the idea of family discipleship, like how I want my kids to live a strong Christian life. But the first 6 are actually on the things we've talked about today: parenting styles, communication, time, discipline. What do these things mean? And the last 9 chapters are all the topics we have to address, but they're actually written to everybody. Mental health's the largest: dating, sex, pornography, media, substance, use and abuse. And one of the big ones we don't address is loneliness. And so it's meant to be more of like a handbook of all of these different things. And it's huge. I fully acknowledge that. It's a bit of a choose your own adventure. But brodeullman.com, so it's brettullman.com is my website. I have about 1,500 links on that. I'm a collector or a curator. I find the best content. If you're on that now, you see a lot of marriage stuff that I'm doing. And so here's a great book. Here's a great TED Talk. And at the very top is all my social media. And I think one thing we all can do is when you find an author, pastor, leader, someone speaking on the topics that you like, follow them. And so that when you're on any social media platform, it's brought right to you. Here are the things that you're kind of looking for. But all of that stuff can come off my website. And the Amazon A, which I mentioned, is right there at the very top with all the categories of books. And one of the most unique ones is books I paid my kids to read.
Oh, wow, that's great.
John Maxwell, in one line in one of his books, just said, my dad paid us to read books. And so my wife and I in grade 9 began to pay our kids $20 a book. And we've done about 12 books now. Stephen Covey's, what's his big one? 7 Principles.
7 Habits for Highly Effective People. Is that right?
But we did the Habits of Highly Effective Teenagers.
Oh, right.
And we've done books on faith. We've done books on dating, and we've done books on technology, atomic habits, upstream, lists of books. But here's the thing I find the most interesting. They've never come to me and asked me for $20 for a single book.
Oh, wow.
And so anyways, all those books are online as well. And I answer all my own emails. So if someone has a question, feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Brett. We just really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.